Mr. President, I'm especially pleased to see that the senator from Utah is presiding this afternoon, because I come to the floor today to offer a resolution that is his inspiration, really, in which I'm pleased to be working on with him. Mr. President, I send to the desk a resolution and ask that it be appropriately referred.
Received and appropriately referred.
Thank you, Mr. President. Simply put, this is a resolution to establish a majority vote on presidential nominations. This would establish, by rule, the Senate tradition of approving presidential nominations by a simple majority vote. The rules change that we propose would establish, by rule, this tradition of approving presidential nominations and of cabinet members and judges by simple majority vote, which existed from the time Thomas Jefferson wrote the rules in 1789 until 2003, when Democrats began filibustering Federal Circuit Court of Appeals nominees. Most importantly, it would change the rules in the right way, through a two-thirds vote, which is what the existing rules of the Senate provide. Unfortunately, on November 21st, 2013, Democrats broke the Senate rules without even attempting to get the 67 votes required to change the rules. It caused former Senator Carl Levin, a Democrat of Michigan, to say at the time, quoting former Senator Arthur Vandenberg of Michigan, that if a majority of the Senate can change its rules at any time, there are no rules. We're the nation's rule-making body, Mr. President. And if we can't follow our own rules, how could we expect the American people to show respect for and follow the rules that we helped to create? The proposal that Senator Lee and I have made will be considered, according to the senator from Missouri, the chairman of the Rules Committee, Senator Blunt, by the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration. It would ultimately require a two-thirds vote by the Senate, the entire Senate, to change the Senate rules. This all has to do with the so-called nuclear option. If I might say an additional word about the so-called nuclear option, I came to the Senate in 2003, which is when our Democratic friends decided that they would use the cloture vote, which requires 60 votes to cut off debate, as a way of denying a presidential nomination on a federal circuit judge. It had never in the history of the Senate been used before in that way. A cloture vote had been used twice, I believe, based on my research, to deny a sub-cabinet member a position in the 1990s, but that was the first time it ever been used on any such position. And it's important, given all the misinformation that's been spread about the nuclear option, to know what the facts are. The tradition has always been in the Senate that presidential nominations deserved an up and down 51 majority vote. That's basically been the tradition. Even with the most controversial nominations, such as that of Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, I believe the vote was 52 to 48. There never was a suggestion that someone might use the cloture rule to require it to be 60 votes. The cloture rule didn't apply to nominations until 1949, so it was never used between the time Jefferson wrote the rules at the beginning of the Senate in 1949. And it was first used in 1968, but not really. President Johnson was trying to save face for Abe Fortas, his friend who was a Supreme Court justice. He had nominated him for Chief Justice. A problem came out, and President Johnson engineered a 45 to 43 cloture vote, which Fortas, quote, won. And that's really the only exception in the whole history of the Senate until 2003, when the Senate said it's going to take 60 votes to confirm a presidential nomination for judge, rather than the traditional 51. I've talked to my several colleagues on the other side about this. They're fairly straightforward about why they did it. President George W. Bush's nominees were, quote, too conservative. I knew some of those judges. Judge Pickering of Mississippi, for example, putting his children into a public school in Mississippi in the 1960s, and he was accused of being a segregationist when he was actually leading the charge in his state of Mississippi to desegregate the public schools. William Pryor of Alabama, he was a law clerk to Judge John Minor Wisdom. I know that the distinguished senator from Utah, who has been a Supreme Court law clerk, knows of Judge Wisdom. He was regarded by everyone as one of the finest federal circuit judges in the country. He was no right-wing conservative, Judge Wisdom. He had the greatest respect for William Pryor. He would have been shocked to hear what was said about him at the time. It was a shocking thing to me to arrive in the Senate in 2003 and find my friends on the other side that for the first time in the Senate history saying that it would take 60 votes to confirm President Bush's judges. And I strongly objected to that. I even suggested that if a few senators on this side and a few on that side would work together, we could break the stalemate. A gang of 14 was created. It did break the stalemate, but as a result of that, five Supreme Court justices, or five judges nominated by George W. Bush were not confirmed because the other side decided they didn't like their philosophical views. And so instead of a 51 vote margin, they required a 60, and so they weren't confirmed. Now here's the tally in the history of the Senate. The number of Supreme Court nominees in the history of our country who've ever had their nomination denied by filibuster, by a cloture vote, is 0, with the exception of the Fortas nomination, if you want to count that. Not a single one. Not a single one. And Supreme Court nominations are among the most controversial and important nominations ever before the Senate. Mr. President, the number of cabinet members who have ever had their nominations denied by filibuster, by requiring 60 votes in the history of the United States Senate, 0, not one. Not an Obama nominee, not a Clinton nominee, not a Bush nominee. 0, not one. Let's go to district judges. There's been a lot of talk about district judges and how difficult it was for President Obama to have district judges confirmed. There's no truth to that whatsoever. No truth whatsoever to that. I was here, I know that. I'll give you an example. There was an effort to deny a seat to a judge from the state of Rhode Island by 60 votes, a judge who I didn't support. But I and a group of other Republicans made sure that we did not use the cloture vote, the 60-vote rule, to deny a seat to a president's district judge nominee for the first time in history, and so we did not. So the number of district judges, federal district judges in the history of the United States who have ever had their nomination denied by a filibuster, by a 60-vote cloture is 0. So Supreme Court justices, except for Fortas, cabinet members, district judges, 0. Filibusters have not been used in the history of this Senate to deny a presidential his nomination. Now, there are other problems that nominations have. I was nominated once. I came to be at the Department of Education. Senator from Ohio, Senator Metzenbaum, put a so-called hold, a secret hold on my nomination. Held me up for 3 months, but then when I came to the floor, I was confirmed. We've abolished those kinds of secret holds. We've made changes in the rules to make it easier for the president's nominees to be confirmed. Now, there have been 7 sub-cabinet members, including John Bolton, 3 Republicans and 4 Democrats who have had their nominations rejected because of a cloture vote, all since 1994. So, no cabinet members, no Supreme Court members, no district judges, 7 sub-cabinet members, and what's the score on circuit judges? This is what brought up the fuss in 2003 when the Democrats filibustered 10 because they were too conservative. As I mentioned earlier, 5 were confirmed, 5 were rejected as part of a compromise. Since that time, Republicans have rejected 2 Democrats. So the score is the Democrats have rejected 5 federal circuit judges, and we've rejected 2. We actually rejected 3 others, but that led to the events of November 21, 2013, when the Democrats broke the rules to change the rules. It would be as if in the Super Bowl or in a playoff game, let's say, Seattle gained 9 yards and they needed 10, and so they changed the rules because they were the home team and said that's a first down. No one would have any respect for the game if you did that, and no one will have any respect for the Senate if we keep doing that, which is the point Senator Lee and I would like to make. Because the tradition of the Senate has always been to give to a president the prerogative of allowing his nominations to be confirmed by 51 votes, or a simple majority of senators sworn, chosen and sworn. We propose to change the rule to reflect the tradition of the Senate. Now, some say, well, why don't you do to them what they did to you? I don't think that's a very good way to live your life. I mean, if the Democrats did the wrong thing, if they brought the Senate to its knees, if they made us into a place that doesn't follow its own rules, then we should do that to them? No, I think what we should do is try to replace bad behavior with good behavior. And good behavior means that we adopt a rule in the way the rules require, which is, in effect, 67 votes. So we'll be offering our resolution as we do today. We'll be offering it in the Rules Committee. We hope that the Rules Committee will approve it and report it to the floor. We hope that Senator McConnell will find time on the floor to bring it up. And we hope that 67 of our colleagues, including us, will agree with it. And we will show the country that we know how to follow our own rules, and we know how to take the tradition of the Senate, which has been there since Thomas Jefferson wrote the rules, with very few exceptions, to make sure that presidential nominees are entitled to an up or down vote by the majority of the Senate. That's been the rule. That's been the tradition. That should be the rule. It's been the tradition. It should be the rule. And the rule should be changed in the way that rules are supposed to be changed according to what we have. There's one other thing I would like to put in without going into any length about it. What happened here on November 21st, 2013 was the lowest point in the United States Senate that I've seen. The majority decided that because it didn't have the votes to put 3 judges, liberal judges, on the D.C. Court of Appeals, it would break the rules to change the rules, and it just put them there anyway. It pretended that the reason it did that was because President Obama couldn't get his nominees confirmed. Well, on every senator's desk is an executive calendar. Everyone who can be confirmed has been reported to a committee, by a committee, to the floor, and is listed on the executive calendar. So there's only one way to get on this calendar, or there was only one way on November 21st, 2013, and that was for a Democratic majority in a committee to report a nominee to the floor of the Senate. That was the only way you could get there. Republicans couldn't do it, only the Democrats could. So this calendar is filled only with people that Democrat majorities approved of. There's only one way for anyone to get off this calendar and onto the floor of the Senate to be confirmed, and that's for the Democratic leader of the Senate, the majority leader, to move for that. Now, we can't object to that. We have to vote on it. There's no motion to proceed with a nomination. He can bring it up anytime he wants to. The charge was made that there was a big backlog of people on this calendar. Well, here are the facts, and anyone who doubts it can look up November 21st, 2013, and you'll see what the backlog was. There were 78 regular order nominations on November 21, 2013. 54 of those nominees had been on the calendar less than 3 weeks. 16 had been on the calendar between 3 and 9 weeks. 8 had been on the calendar for more than 9 weeks. There was an informal agreement between the floor staffs that 40 of the uncontroversial nominees on this calendar, 40 of the 78 would be confirmed before the Senate left at the end of the week. Let me use a specific example, district judges. We hear a lot about district judges. We had changed the rules, Mr. President, at the request of the majority leader to make it easier to confirm district judges. We basically said that there could only be 2 hours of debate on a district judge, and the majority could give back 1 of those hours. There were, on the date the Democrats said there was a big backlog, 13 district judges on this calendar. Those were the only ones that could have been brought up by the majority leader. 1 had been waiting for more than 9 weeks. 4 had been waiting for between 3 and 9 weeks. 8 had been waiting for less than 3 weeks. But the important point is, you could have confirmed them all over the weekend. All the majority leader had to do was to move the nomination of each of the 13, wait an intervening day, and then say you did that on Thursday, the intervening day would be Friday, and then we would come back Monday and we would have 1 hour debates for each of those nominees. So, Mr. President, there was no excuse. There was no backlog. The Washington Post and the Congressional Research Service said that President Obama's nominees were moving through the Senate at about the same speed that President Clinton and President George W. Bush's nominees had been at that time in their terms. That's what the Congressional Research Service and the Washington Post said. The calendar speaks the truth about the absence of a backlog, and I was involved 3 times in working to change the rules to make it easier to do presidential nominations. It was nothing more than a power grab. So our friends should just admit that and admit that it was the wrong thing to do for the Senate. A lot of senators weren't here then. The resolution that Senator Lee and I have proposed gives the Senate a chance to abandon bad behavior and begin to adopt good behavior, to take a tradition of the Senate that's been followed almost without exception since 1789 and make it the order of the day. And to do it the way the Senate rules say that it should be done with 67 votes. Now, in closing, let me simply say that I appreciate the fact that I'm able to work on this with Senator Lee. This legislation developed really from a conversation and a suggestion he made to me on the floor of the Senate. And I thought about it and I said, I think he may be right about that. And we've worked together, and because of his background in the law and his experience with the Supreme Court, his leadership on this issue has been an invaluable help. So I thank him for his suggestions. I thank him for his leadership. I look forward to working with him when it comes before the Rules Committee, and I hope we can persuade our fellow senators in a bipartisan way that a good way to begin this year would be to begin to change the rules the right way and to reject the bad behavior and bad habits of the last session of Congress. I thank the President. I yield the floor.